This episode of the Auto Tech Show is sponsored by Zebra Technologies, connecting you with the edge, where the future is boundless. Hello and welcome to what is a very special episode of the Auto Tech Show. We're shooting this episode today from just outside London with a very special guest, David Shaw. David is the CEO at Tire Industry Research, a highly trusted and relied upon organization that helps clients to understand their audiences, and the global tire industry through detailed studies, research projects, and raw data points. From branding and marketing to manufacturing, technology, and raw materials supply, Tire Industry Research adds a deep understanding of the supply chain serving the world tire industry. And it is with that background that we take this opportunity to dive into our topic today on how we can use tires, data, and AI to unlock the future of this evolving industry. David, welcome to the show. First off, thank you so much for having me in your house and your beautiful home here, a beautiful sunny day in London, and of course for your time. I know it's very valuable, so I appreciate the opportunity today. And
Mark, thanks very much to you for inviting me on here. I mean, I know you've done lots about tyres before. You've done retreads, you've done shop data, you've done all kinds of stuff. So thanks to you from a tyre nerd for focusing on the tyre business, which a lot of people find boring. I personally find it really exciting and interesting. But let's talk about tyres.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I didn't realize how much goes into the tire world from the outside world. It's just very two-dimensional. But when we had you at Tire Summit last summer and you gave all that amazing data and really got into it, it was really eye-opening for myself just to see how many layers of complexity there are for tires. Do you feel like that's still something that the general population, even in automotive, don't fully value?
Yeah, I mean, tires are difficult. And the reason they haven't, from external appearance, they haven't changed enormously over the last, let's say, 100 years, but internally they changed massively. The construction of the tires, the materials, how they're made, how they're used, how they're sold, it's changed massively over the last years, and it will continue to change even more as we get the full value from the data that's coming out of the factories and out of the sales and marketing operations.
Yeah, that's a brilliant way to start the conversation, because that's exactly kind of what I wanted to kick off with, kind of look at that data point of view. You just mentioned it. The tire itself generates a massive amount of data. Some we know about, some we're yet to fully optimize. It seems generally very much underutilized, all the data that's coming in. You're someone that looks at a lot of data and statistics as part of your research projects. Why do you suspect this particular side of the industry, and I guess the industry itself is a little bit behind? Why is it struggling to turn all of this raw data into actionable insights?
Now that's a great question. It's a multifaceted thing.
Course.
There's lots of things going on here. The first one is that it's an industry. I hesitate to say it, but it's people who look like me, old white blokes, and that demographic is really bad at change on the whole. They're really bad at data, at analytics. They're really bad at trying to change the way they do stuff. Part of the reason that the senior people in the organization have got to that position is because they know stuff and they've learned stuff over the last 30 years or so. One of the great challenges is they believe that the stuff they've learned over the last 30 years will be relevant to the next 5 or 10 or 20 years. And in my view, they're just wrong, because the way we do stuff is going to change massively as a result of data analytics, as a result of the need to speed things up, as a result of legislation, and also of sustainability and other drivers within the tire industry. So we've got a bunch of people who are relatively close to retirement who believe that their expertise, based on the last 20 years of experience, will help them to do well in the future. But in many cases, they're wrong, because what we've now got is a bunch of 25, 30-year-olds who've got PhDs in data analytics, and they're able to show that those very experienced people are wrong in some cases, because you can just imagine a young woman with a PhD comes up with her tablet, shows the head of compounding that under these circumstances, we get failures 6 steps down the manufacturing line. And the chief of compounding had no idea about that, but suddenly she's able to show him that he's been wrong all of these years because of data.
When these changes happen, when they eventually do start to take place, do you feel like it's going to be immediately recognizable, or is this more of a long play that they'll see change over time and positive impact over time?
It's going to be a generational thing. I mean, I said there's a bunch of people who look a bit like me who are close to retirement. They need to retire before, or at least get out of the business, before we can start to see this revolution. Secondly, I think the tire industry was relatively slow to start to exploit this. It really only started about maybe 10 years ago, whereas in the Bay Area, in the computer world, this thing started 20, 30 years ago. People started to understand the value of data. Because we're slow, now we're trying to recruit people who've got the right skills, who've got the right attributes, and who can make a difference. And those people are both rare and expensive nowadays. There's another dimension to this, which is that Goodyear, for example, is based in Akron, Ohio. Would you, as a data scientist, want to move from the Bay Area to Akron? Would you want to lose all of your contacts with venture capital, with new startups in the Bay Area to move to the Midwest? Yeah. The same applies to Michelin in Clermont-Ferrand. The same applies to a lot of different tire manufacturers around the world. They're in places which are relatively cheap to live, but they're not centers of activity within the data world.
And I think next generation as well.
Exactly right. And I think that's holding people back a little bit. So I think the tire companies have to set up data centers or activity centers much closer to where those people want to live, as opposed to close to their headquarters.
So it's a total shift from the work they do to the people they hire to where they recruit. And like we just said before we hit record, you have to be where the people are these days rather than expect them to come to you.
And they won't. I mean, they got the choice of whether they work for this company or that company, this industry or that industry, and this location or that location. Yeah. And because they're in such demand, they will make those choices. They'll vote with their feet.
Yeah, and they have the flexibility to do that and the options because of all the education coming out and the demand of this small group of people, like you had mentioned. So
yeah, and I think that type of person is much more flexible in terms of how they approach work, in terms of working remotely, in terms of working at different hours of the day. I mean, we've all heard stories about the 25-year-olds who won't wake up until midday, and then they'll work until 2 a.m. I mean, it's
different
not unusual
lifestyles,
for that.
Different. Yeah. Everyone's in a different aspect, but to have that flexibility and that globalization effect, to have a team member who lives across the ocean, who can work just in equally capacity, but maybe their hours are a bit different than you would expect as well.
And if you're in a traditional business, and tires is a traditional business, sometimes the bosses don't really like that. It's just the way it is. But
that's that generational shift.
That's what I think we need to see. Yeah,
we need to see for the tires to come up. So in a lot of conversations that I have a lot with solution providers, manufacturers, OEMs, it's apparent that there's companies that have huge data silos, massive amounts of information, and they put it somewhere, but then they have inconsistent reporting, inconsistent usage of that. What are the biggest roadblocks to creating a unified, validated data platform in this industry?
Well, you know as well as I do that any data analyst will spend 80% of their time cleaning data, validating data, making sure it can all work together. Yeah. Clearly, that's an issue. I was trained as an engineer a long time ago, and I do remember that in every company that employed me, I would have my own little silo of data, right? I would have my spreadsheets, I'd have my macros, I'd have my stuff. I wouldn't tell everyone about it because it was good. And I don't think I'm the only person who does that. Okay. I think there's a whole bunch of engineers out there and other people, accountants and goodness knows who else, who keep their own data. So that's the first block, is that can you persuade someone a bit like me to give up all of my data and put it onto a central platform and potentially give other people in the organization who might actually want my job, can you persuade me to hand over all that data, number one, and explain how it works? Number two.
Interesting. That's an interesting point on its own. I would never have thought of that it's their job security and their value to the company is how they manage that data, and putting it in a central point, they think or assume it makes them invaluable.
it adds to that aura of
incredible.
I can't be replaced. If you're the only person who's got access to data and the only person who knows how to drive that spreadsheet, for example, that's certainly a factor. The other one is that you've got lots of different sites around the world, each of them running different programs, different systems, different platforms. Someone somewhere has got to bring all of those different platforms together, put it into the same platform, and then persuade everybody else to use that platform as opposed to the one that they've learned over the last 10 or 15 years. Sure. And what that does, it adds to the risk of data insecurity. So suddenly you've got all of your data in one place, and data for tire companies is massively important. Suddenly you've got all of that in one place. If your security is compromised, suddenly someone can gain access to that, and that would be really, really bad. And we've seen that. We've seen it at Bridgestone, we've seen it in Continental, we've seen it
big brands,
in all sorts of tire companies. As they centralize their data, they need to become much more cognizant of data security.
How they manage it for their own protection, and then the protection of the customers and their partners and other manufacturers.
Yeah. And one of the key routes in fact, is that if I'm selling tires to somebody and they have access to my systems, sometimes I will get a phishing, a spam email saying, we've changed our details to this bank account, this number, this whatever. Can you just make sure you update? And of course, that allows the criminals access to the data. So you've got to be really careful about how all of that works.
But in the end of it, is the risk worth the reward?
It's speed. The reward is speed. The reward is accelerating the time with which products can be developed. And I think throughout the auto industry, as I'm sure you've seen on previous podcasts, the time between saying we need a new product and delivering that product is getting more and more and more compressed. And one way to increase that compression is to have simulations, is to stick the data into a system and try to project how the product will behave. Now, in my case, it's tires, but also in vehicles, you're looking at the suspension, you're looking at the handling, you're looking at all of those other things. If you can simulate more, if you can design in the computer, then you're accelerating the whole process. Another use case for AI would be materials development. We're all looking at making things more sustainable, getting rid of fossil-sourced materials. AI at this stage cannot say, look at that material because it's going to be brilliant. But what it can say is, if I'm head of materials, here's a spectrum of 20 materials that I think might be interesting in the future. AI can say, ignore those 15, look at those 5. And that will reduce by a factor of 4 the amount of work you need to do in order to develop that new material.
Sure. It's a good point and a good time to bring up AI, because I think a lot of what we're talking about can be assisted by it. We've seen it disrupt every industry. There isn't an arm it hasn't touched at this point where we're at. And it's only becoming more commonly used and more efficient in all these industries. Yet we come to automotive, we come to tire, there's a reluctance, there's a refusal to adopt. We've seen this publicly. I think your data, some of your most recent reports have pointed to where this maybe makes a larger effect on some brands than others. But I'd be interested to hear what you have to think from all the statistics and quantifiable point of view. Why are some companies more reluctant in this industry to bring AI on board and do what you just said? I mean, it sounds like an obvious answer to at least make a step forward in efficiency, but why are we so reluctant to use these tools?
I'm going to take a step back, first of all. I'm going to say, what is AI? What is artificial intelligence? Is it machine learning? Is it large language models? Is it generative AI? I mean, what are we talking about here? And I think AI has become a little bit overused. I've mentioned sustainability a lot. That word, to my mind, it means nothing. How do you talk about sustainability? You need to drill down into what it is you're trying to achieve. Is it low carbon dioxide? Is it fewer emissions? Is it less damaging to the environment? And so on and so on.
It's a whole umbrella.
It's the same with AI, in my view. Is that this word AI has become popularized by the media as something that's either the devil or God, depending on how you look at it. And I think we need to focus down on what we mean by the aspect of AI. So is it machine learning? Do we take a huge database of results and do some data mining on that in order to extract insights? And I think that's one aspect of AI. Another one, of course, is if you try to model or predict how sales will happen or how a factory will operate through digital twins and such like, you need to understand what this aspect of AI is, what the use case is, what tools you need to deliver it. And I think that level of understanding is not universal at this stage. Another one is what I said before, is the tire company is full of people who are in a demographic that's not particularly good at change. And if you are not supplying tires to the vehicle makers, you're not being driven to accelerate your design and development cycles. If you're working with vehicle makers, with the car makers, with the truck makers, then they're saying we need much faster development cycles. But if you're primarily serving the replacement market for tires, then there's less of a driver to do that. And certainly what we've seen amongst the leading tire makers, we've seen Bridgestone, Michelin, Continental, Goodyear, Pirelli particularly, be right at the forefront of change, whereas the replacement market a little bit slower.
But that will shorten, that will get tighter over time, and it probably has been as well. That's going to be a level playing field fairly quick.
Again, it's going to be a generational thing.
Okay.
I think these things take a long time to build up the internal expertise. Now you can outsource it to a certain extent. There are companies such as yours, and there are other companies out there who will help you to move forward, help you to make those quick wins. But I think eventually this is going to become an IP critical activity within the tire companies, is going to be critical to their success, to their speed of development. And so they will need to build up internal resources. Now, how they manage the balance between internal and external, whether it's primarily external doing the hard work and management is kept internal, or whether they keep internal folks to do the detailed tool building. I think that's going to vary between the different companies. It's certainly much quicker to bring in an external agency and use them to deliver those wins. Sure. But over time, the sensitivity of the data that's being handled means that you probably will want to bring most of it in-house.
If not, bring that agency in-house eventually with some of these larger players. Is there a blueprint right now on how that balance should be based on the numbers and how you're seeing and how companies are operating? Is there a go-to strategy of how to balance that external-internal balance right now? Or is it continuously evolving? And
it's continuously evolving,
yeah.
for sure. But one of the things we do notice is that in the early phases of the digitalization revolution at tire companies, is tire companies will go through a phase of building partnerships with external agencies, with external companies. In some cases, at sort of, round B fundraising, they will buy into those companies. There is a lack of practice within some companies at bringing entrepreneurs on board. So you might well put $1, $2, $5, $10, $50 million into a startup company, but what you're really buying there is not the expertise, you're buying the people. And sometimes those people don't transition well from an entrepreneurial environment into a corporate, slow-moving tire environment.
It changes the way they work and the freedom they maybe once had.
And I think that skill is being developed in 2 or 3 of the big tire companies now, to bring those entrepreneurs on board to help them to deliver more than they could as an entrepreneur within the corporate enterprise. Because as an entrepreneur, you're sometimes a bit limited on resources. Yeah. You've got lots of agility, lots of flexibility. If you move into the corporate world, it's the other way around, exactly right. You've got a lot more resources, or potentially more resources, but also potentially a lot less agility. So the tire companies are learning, some of them, learning how to be a bit more agile and how to meet the needs of those entrepreneurs.
From a data and a statistical point of view, to you, Is it obvious who's winning at this right now and who's failing? You don't have to give names. I don't want to out anybody. We're friends with everyone.
I'm happy to give names.
But are there companies that are doing this really well and it's obvious by the numbers that are being shown, and on the other side, companies who are just dropping the ball?
I think it's the companies who started 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I've been pretty open about saying that Bridgestone and Michelin started sufficiently long time ago that they've understood what needs to happen in order to deliver more digital services and more digital products. I think Goodyear started relatively recently, and they've done really well at building partnerships. They've got some fantastic people within their organization, but it's still just a small kernel at the moment. Okay. And it needs to grow before they can generate revenue. If we look at revenue, I think Michelin says it's got about 16% of its total revenue is generated from non-tire activities. Now, that includes things like medical and conveyor belts, but also digital products and services. Yeah. Bridgestone says 30%, wow. But the vast majority of that is not digital data and services. The vast majority of that is retail activities in North America and elsewhere. They don't really talk about what percentage of their revenues comes from digital services. Goodyear is very, very low. Pirelli is an interesting one. Pirelli is probably the most interesting case. They were amongst the first to become digitized, which is the correct word. I never know that. People tell me it's digitalized, but
digitalized, yeah. They're moving forward with their digital game. Yeah,
thank you. That's a much better way
to say it. Remove the word.
Yeah. So I think Pirelli has been moving forward with its digital game for quite a while, and they have looked at the use cases and the profitability that they can get from providing digital services. And I think they found a way through the maze, which will enable them to do well in the future, but not necessarily compete with Google or Apple or Amazon services.
Different game altogether, yeah.
Whether your biggest goal is increasing actionable visibility, augmenting and empowering a productive workforce, or optimizing quality and traceability, Zebra has what you need to advance in your journey and transform everywhere from the plant floor to the warehouse and across the supply chain. Because the connected factory is where innovation and productivity finally meet. And Zebra is ready to help you get there.
It's really interesting. And now in prep for this, we brought up a use case, and I'd like to bring it up now because I think it's quite an interesting one the more I dove into it. And that's predicting where and how many units of each SKU should be stocked. I think we've seen a massive shift where everyone used to just do just in time, and then there was the supply chain issue, and then everyone started hoarding stock but didn't have the space to hoard stock. Using AI to think in this capacity as solving this particular problem as an example, how do you see that working? How do you see it being used in that predictive, strategic way?
I think it's critical. The top tire makers, and we've mentioned half a dozen names so far, they cannot make money by making tires in 16-inch sizes. I mean, tires come in different sizes. On the big SUVs you see now, they're sort of 18, 19, 20, 21-inch tires.
That's standard, yeah, on these EVs especially.
Yeah, exactly. If you go to small vehicles in India and China, they're still running on 15, 16-inch tires. Yeah. Now, the big tire makers, the big brands that we all know, they cannot make money in that 15, 16-inch size, even up to 17-inch sizes. So they're looking at those high profit items, the 21-inch tires and so forth. We call them high added value. And if you want to take a break point, it's sort of 18 inches plus and 17 inches minus. 17 inches minus being standard, 18 inches plus being profit. That borderline will change over time. It used to be 17 inches, now it's 18 inches, and we're already talking about maybe moving that border up to 19 inches. But the critical thing is that those tire companies can't make money in the low standard sizes. However, the high profit sizes make up only roughly 25% of the market. And there are more SKUs in that market because there are original equipment for Porsche, for BMW, for Mercedes, for Tesla. They're all different SKUs. They're all different tires.
Yeah.
They might have the same branding on the side.
No one would know the difference.
But internally, they're a little bit different.
Based on weight and load and everything.
So although it's 25% of the market in numbers, it's roughly 50% of the market in terms of SKUs. And that means that typically you'll be making 10%, or the production runs will be 1/10 the size in the high added value compared to the standard value.
Okay.
And if you're making 1/10 of the number of tires, let's say 500 instead of 5,000, you're selling roughly 1/10. And in the past, if you were making 5,000, you could make those tires, you could put them in warehouses across the country. Some of them wouldn't sell, maybe 10% of them wouldn't sell, but that didn't matter because you could absorb that loss. If now you're only making 500 and you get it wrong, you're only going to sell 50% of those things, or maybe even less. And that really affects the profit equation that people have worked out ahead of time. They said, okay, let's make 500 of these. We'll sell them for $200, 200 euros each. We'll make a pile of money. If you don't sell them at 200 euros, if you have to remain to them after 3 or 4 years and they've taken up space on the shelves, suddenly that equation doesn't work anymore. So you're not making nearly as much money as you thought. And that's where we come to your question, is in the past, they would try to predict how many of those 16-inch tires would sell and make roughly the right number. Now they have to be much more accurate about predicting how many of this SKU, that SKU, the other SKU, and that's difficult.
Absolutely.
And I'll be blunt, it's impossible.
Totally.
You can't do it in the old-fashioned way. Yeah. So what we now need to do is look at live tire sales over the last 2 or 3 weeks, literally a very, very short time scale. Use that data against historical data, against what we know the car park to be. So we know there were so many Tesla model XYZ sold in this particular location. That will translate to a replacement market over a certain length of time. You do that with Porsches, you do that with Teslas, you do that with Mercedes, you do that across every single vehicle model. You know roughly where it is. Combine it with holiday data, with weather data, with all sorts of other data. Yeah. And a human probably can't do that.
A team couldn't do that.
But a computer can.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to combine all of that data that we're talking about and find the patterns and then project forward over the next 1 or 2 or 3 weeks, maybe even longer, about how many of each SKU is going to sell. And that's starting to happen. We're seeing the inventories at the big tire makers fall. And that's not just about them selling fewer tires. They are selling fewer tires, but the inventories are falling as they get better at anticipating what tires will be sold and getting it right.
It's less sitting around and hoping that those sell. They're more accurate, more defined with what they're creating so that it doesn't just sit on a shelf.
That's exactly right. So that is a key use case for AI. Machine data, machine learning. I don't know what word to use there, but it's a key use case because it defines what tires you manufacture, how you manufacture them, how you organize your manufacturing operation upstream. So it affects all of the operations within the tire company, and that's slowly moving. That used to be the domain of the tire manufacturing engineers, of the heads of the factories. They would get advice from the sales team about what tires to make, but they wouldn't necessarily always follow the advice. But now the data people and the sales people are much more, at least they should be, much more in charge of what products are being made, how the factories are being used in order to meet the demand from the public.
And then feed that into the machine.
Yeah, and it's a fundamental change, actually, moving away from the engineers towards the sales team and the data teams.
So as a last point that I want to address today with this talk, which is already has my mind going in so many different directions, I want to know what happens next. So we know where we're at. We know what's happened. We know the tools that we have, all this data, statistics, everything coming in. What does it take for the tire industry to transition from all this fragmentation, which seems to be very prevalent, to an AI-powered, and I use AI again there, but an AI-powered decision-making model that can help us with these quick wins? What is it going to take to go from fragmentation to unification?
I think you can look at two different types of tyre manufacturer. I've talked about that before. We can talk about the ones who serve the vehicle makers, the original equipment market. You can also talk about the ones who serve primarily the replacement market with ambitions to work for the vehicle makers. I call them the jackals, but these are companies like JK Tyre, Apollo, Ceylon, Linglong. Those companies can make money in the lower end of the market because they've got more efficient operations, because they've got smaller head offices. They can continue to make money. They don't need nearly as, or the need is not nearly as pressing upon those to go fully digital. They are going fully digital, but they can do it, I wouldn't say a leisurely pace, but they can do it at their own pace.
Pace that they're comfortable with without shifting too much.
So they can continue to use the tyre business as the cash cow that funds all of that, and is generating lots of cash. Yeah. Then we've got the big names that everybody's heard of, Bridgestone, Goodyear, Continental, Yokohama, Sumitomo, Vulcan, Pirelli. Those companies are really in a bit of a struggle because their markets are declining, because those jackals are attacking the markets, and we see that very widely. So what they have said, certainly Bridgestone and Michelin said it 10 years ago, is they need to use the tyre business as the cash cow to fund new businesses that are mostly in the data and services side. It's working. But I think more slowly than the tyre makers expected. I think they had not seen that they would face competition from organizations which are not related to tyres, which are related to data and maybe vehicles. And those companies are also coming in terms of telematics, in terms of other areas. I think there's another dimension, which is that, and I owe this to Yves Cassot, who's the chief digital officer at Michelin. He says you still need people, is that you can use AI and you can extract lots of information from the data, but you need people to see if that's sensible, to see if the conclusions are sensible. And trying to amalgamate those two different skills, the data analytics and the people who really understand the tyre business, who really understand tyres, is quite hard because there are a bunch of people out there, but they're very few and far between. And I try to meet as many of them as possible and try to nurture them. These are the people who've got 10, 20, 30 years of experience in tyres, but remain fully open to new ideas. And I can mention Burkhard Wies at Continental. I can mention a bunch of people at Pirelli.
But it's a rarity. It's not everybody, but they do exist.
Absolutely, it's a rarity. And those people need to be given more slack, more ability to work together with the data teams in order to validate the data, in order to make sure that whatever the data teams come up with is sensible in terms of the tyre industry. I think there are still a lot of people who look a bit like me who resist all of that stuff for all sorts of reasons. They don't understand it. They can't do it. It's difficult. Yeah. But there are a few people out there who really get it. And I think those are the people at Black Donuts, actually. There's a Finnish company called Black Donuts that came out of the Nokian research and development team.
Oh, cool.
And they design factories. They design tyre factories. And if you've got $30 million to spare, that will be the service fee to build your factory. The factory will cost you $500 million, something like that. Sure. But that's a way into the market. And the people at Black Donuts have understood that the business is changing dramatically. And they're starting to use all of these different techniques. They've built 50 factories roughly worldwide, and they're building roughly 7 each year. As they build those, there's an ongoing development contract with those factories, because the people who've paid over that money, they're not tyre people. They're in the auto service, or they're in the auto components, or they might be, I don't know, in the cement business, whatever. Yeah. They're in all kinds of other businesses, but they've seen an opportunity in tyres. And Black Donuts can help them through that. But what that means is that Black Donuts now has an ongoing development contract so that they can help those newcomers to improve their tires. And that's a much faster development loop than might take place at one of the established tire names, for example. So I think there's a bit of disruption going on. It requires lots of expertise. It requires lots of understanding, but it requires, to my mind at least, the balance between tire knowledge and experience, and also a good understanding of what data and analytics can do for the business. And once you've got those two working together, then you can move faster and more effectively than either one of those two sides on its own.
And that just puts you in a better spot for the future with how quickly it's changing.
Absolutely. I mean, it is changing. Everything is changing about this business.
Yeah. As a final note, then, your final word for tire makers, no matter large, small, in the middle, what is that critical next step that they need to do to survive everything we've discussed, all this data management, AI coming into the picture, generational shifts? There's so many aspects at play, and I apologize for putting you on the spot with this one, but you see the numbers, you see the data, you talk to the companies. What's that one lasting note that they need to be aware of right now, as critical as it might be?
You have anticipated my answer is there is no one thing. There's going to be a whole bunch of things that they need to do at the same time. And I think the jackals that I mentioned are in some ways in a better position because, as you quite rightly said, they can take their own time they can do this thing at their own pace. I think the other guys, the established names, form partnerships.
I was going to say, is it easier to do that?
Yeah, work with external agencies who have the expertise, who have the skills to feed into the tire people, but not only the expertise, but also the understanding of the tire business. So, because the tire business has its own language, it uses certain terms. It uses there are certain assumptions being made all the time, and if you just engage an external organization that doesn't get the tire business, you're not going to get very far. So you need someone who's got a bit of experience. And I think Airline might have some of that experience.
We're learning. We're definitely learning. There's the quick win then for these big guys looking for these companies, acquiring them or working so closely with them in a partnership capacity. That's the quick win. That's the easy way out of a lot of these problems that they could run into.
There's no easy way out. I think the quick win is, as I've said a few times, the older generation don't necessarily trust that this data stuff is going to help the business. And when I talk about the quick wins, it's really saying that the data team, who are a bunch of 25, 30, 35-year-old people, need to be able to demonstrate a really good win in the timescale of 6 months, or ideally less, that's going to save money and improve operations in order to show the people who look like me that there's something worth doing here, that this is worth investigating. And you do that quick win on a 6-month project. You do a second 6-month project. Then maybe you'll be allowed to do a 12-month project. But it's going to be...
Take those small bites.
Exactly that.
And find those low-hanging fruit and get the buy-in and get that cultural shift within the organization. So every next step is just that much easier, that less of a barrier to climb. I think that's a fantastic
Get the buy-in. I think that's the thing that you need is you need to gradually convert all of those people who are a little bit mistrustful of data to say, yeah, this works. This really does produce results.
Yeah, and the data points to that. So we know it's there. It's a matter of just trusting the information in front of us, trusting those who want to take those lead steps and have that bit of extra space, those champions in the organization, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and identifying those champions and empowering them is going to be key to moving it forward.
I love that. That's a topic on its own. I love that, and would certainly look forward to talking with you more about that. David, listen, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Every time you speak, I get more excited about tires. I don't know how that's possible, but put that down somewhere. No, listen, I've thoroughly enjoyed this talk. Thank you so much for obviously having me here in your home and for being on the show. I really appreciate it. Any final note from your side before we sign off?
I just say thanks again for raising the awareness of tyres. I mean, I call myself a tyre geek or nerd or something like that. It's not a very popular thing at dinner parties. So thank you very much for
we'll get it there.
Doing the cause.
That's our goal. Make it popular at dinner parties. I love it.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Maybe in a few years. All right, we'll give it time. David, thank you so much again.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark.
And for everyone watching and listening to this episode of the Auto Tech Show, thank you so much for being with us. Hopefully you've learned a lot, taken a little bit of something away, and maybe got that little bit more excited about the tire industry, sparks maybe a few research projects on your own. But fantastic conversation today with David. Tons to take away. If you have any questions or comments about what you heard today, you want to add to the conversation, head down to the notes below, resources for both David and myself there. Please get in touch, start those conversations. We'll be happy to have that conversation with you and get back in touch with you as well. But with that, we'll bring this episode of the Auto Tech Show on location in the UK to an end. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Wishing you a great day in the world wherever you may be. Bye for now. Once again, this episode of the Auto Tech Show was sponsored by Zebra Technologies, connecting you with the edge, where the future is boundless. Learn more at zebra.com.